Merritt Kopas is a multimedia artist and game designer, best known for her work Hug Punks, Conversations with My Mother, LIM, and Consensual Torture Simulator. One of her latest efforts, Space Off, which she created with Anna Antropy, details a post-breakup fight in space. Whether hugging strangers or trying to rectify the definition of empathy, there is an inclusive theme that runs through Kopas's work, one that challenges the current state of games and, quite simply, art as games or games as art. I want to thank Merritt Kopas for joining us today on 5 Questions. Thank you for coming on the air with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I'm going through your work, or I'm playing Space Off here, and you know, it's this big metaphor for a break off in space, for Space Off, and the easy questions that came to mind is, you know, why space? Why a wolf? You know, why a cool bug? Why were these elements picked to explore this breakup theme in the game?
Right. So the game actually started because Anna Anthropy and I are both really big fans of Star Control 2, and for anyone who hasn't played it, it's just like this fairly old at this point 2D space battle game. But what distinguishes it from a lot of similar games is that there is this really like great sense of humor present, and that like runs through the story mode, but also just through like the way the characters are animated. So like Space Off has these character portraits that show the characters that the players are playing as, and like that's an idea we got from Star Control. So we really loved that game, and we had also been playing a 2-player game called Chop Squares at the time, which is by Taylor Bai Wu, and it's just like a 2-player symmetrical combat game that's just really quick, really playful. Like it wants players to sort of have like a friendly rivalry, and it's sort of avoiding like this dynamic where players want to dominate each other. And I really liked that, and so we were thinking about those two things at the same time, and hit on this idea of just making a symmetrical 2-player game in space. The breakup thing came a little later. So when we were talking about like, okay, well, we have these 2 characters, and we hadn't decided that they were like a weird wolf or a bug yet. That sort of came later, but we have these 2 characters, and like for me, I'm always thinking like, okay, well, why is this happening? Like, what's going on? Like, what's the narrative? And it sort of made sense that you'd have these 2 characters who are really angry at one another. So like, okay, so why is that? And a breakup just seemed like a really perfect story to tell. Just this idea of like these two characters who are really conspicuously like not gendered and like not human. Like they're these weird kind of animal insect figures. So that's sort of why they're the wolf and the bug, who are just like really going at it. And it's like these 2 characters who, at least at one point, from the dialogue, like, you know, really cared about one another, but right now are just really angry. And because they're, you know, like in space, they're just gonna like hop into spaceships and start like firing lasers and missiles at each other.
Well, you know, it's at least in my experience, you know, the breakups can come across as this kind of, you know, ultimate form of rejection, you know, at least for the person experiencing it, and they kind of elicit, you know, all this like anger and all these kind of deep-seated emotional feelings, sometimes not even related to the person being broken up with, just kind of come out and are thrown at the other person who is broken up with you. But in specifically in Space Off, what caught my attention is that we don't, as the player, we don't really know the terms of the breakup. We're kind of left to guess how it happened.
Right.
So it doesn't give us a chance to really sympathize with the cool bug or the wolf. And I'm curious why that choice was made. And you know, was it solely was the hope to kind of magnify solely this portion of moving on, or was there just, I mean, we'll give you the reason.
So yeah, there are these 2 characters, and I wanted there to be like a narrative that wasn't just like laid over top of the mechanics of like playing the game. So it's a symmetrical two-player game. Like the players have like the same capabilities, and I didn't want there to be like a really clear, obvious sense that like one of these characters was like in the wrong or one was in the right, because that would sort of like run against that dynamic we were trying to create. And I think what comes across is that like even breakups that may be mutual, that both people may recognize as being for the best, can be like you say, really destructive. So, it wouldn't have worked as well, I think, if you have, if like, oh, Mind Wolf, just cheated on Coolbug, and, it's like a totally one-sided dynamic. Well, like then that doesn't really fit with this idea of a two-player symmetrical game to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to. That's what I was trying to get at. Is mostly there is this sometimes, even like you said, it's a mutual breakup, and what happens is that sometimes you project past rejection onto this new rejection,
Right.
and the characters, even though they're funny and they have these quips that they come out whenever they win, or destroy the other person or other character, they still kind of come off. You almost, the quip almost comes off a little negative. Like you kind of, I mean, in my experience, I almost didn't like it. Like, hey, like why can't we just all get over this?
Yeah. It's like they're rubbing the salt in. Yeah. And yeah, I think there's a pretty wide range of them. Like some of them are just like really terrible puns, but then like there's one that's just like you never called. Like, and I like that range. I like that there are some that are just like pretty negative or that are pretty like bitter, and then some that are more playful.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, there's this. I found kind of a common theme running through most of your work is this kind of power of the individual, or at least the responsibility of the individual. In conceptual torture chamber, one character has power over another, but that question of power is, it's agreed on. Hug punks. Hugging the hugging of strangers feels rebellious and empowering in its message because it's sort of like rebellious but loving at the same time. Crumchin's quest, you get to choose where you get to go around the house as a cat. You just move around as a cat. What more responsibility can you ask for? Or what more fun can you have? And I'm curious how you view the ability of a person to have influence or power over another person or thing, and how you believe that power of personal responsibility how you try to have that belief come across in your games, if that's a conscious decision that's made.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what I'll say first is that video games overwhelmingly are about individuals, right? It's like there are exceptions, like games like Civilization are more of taking like more of a broad view, but like overwhelmingly games are like about like one character and like one character's like heroic struggle or one character's like rise to power or like whatever. So I think probably the fact that I'm working in games is like part of that. Like I'm influenced by that stuff. But when I do things like that, I want to think about like, okay, well, yeah, like what kinds of responsibilities do people have to one another? So Hug Punks, like for example, it isn't just like it isn't like a free-for-all hug simulator. Like you're not running around hugging everyone you see. There is like this kind of consent element to it. So like I wanted to get across this idea of like responsibility to other people, of like being cognizant of other people's boundaries and desires. So I guess in that sense, like, and same with consensual torture simulator is like, yeah, like I am like trying to depict like the power of like an individual person or like people's agency, but tempering that with like a responsibility to other people and like an awareness of other people's desires and needs, and sort of striking a balance between those things. And I think in both of those games especially, that's what I was trying to depict.
Switching gears from the very loud and loud colors of hug punks are a very tantalating topic as the sexual or consensual torture chamber. Your latest one that came, I'm not sure if you released it right around the time of Space Off, but is Lullaby for Heartsick Spacer.
Hmm.
You know, contrary to some of your other work, it's very minimalistic. It's quiet. In my playing, I felt like it's almost like this game of like meditation.
Mm.
At least it's the closest I've seen a game come to kind of like a meditative quality to it. And specifically in that game, standing still is its own reward. You stand still and music is played when you lay down.
Right.
So I'm curious, after a catalog of all these bright and more bombastic games, what brought you to build something a little more quiet, a little more minimal?
Yeah. So I guess over the past few months, I've been thinking about the ways that like we use games beyond just like, you know, a really simple definition of fun. And so I run a site called Forest Ambassador, and usually the games that I post on that, they're not themed in any way. They're just sort of like accessible, short, free games. But occasionally, like I'll just like take a month and say I'm only going to post games that fit this theme. And so recently, I hadn't been having like a great winter. I just moved back to Toronto in the fall, and I sort of forgot what it was like here in the winter. So I had some pretty intense seasonal affective disorder stuff, and I was just like, I can't sit down and play a game about someone's like intensely negative experiences right now. I'm setting a boundary for myself. Like I'm going to take care of myself. And instead, like what I'm going to do is just for this month, I'm just going to curate games that are like positive in some way. So that could be they're about like affection or like positive relationships. It could just be that they're calming, like you say, like meditative. And I was really thinking about some of those games that I had posted when the Space Cowboy Jam rolled around, and I had an idea for something else that I had ended up totally scrapping, and I just had picked up these assets that Adam Atomic had put online for this Metroid game that he had discarded. I was just like, it'd be really cool to take these assets that are intended for like, kind of maybe like an action platformer sort of game, and just make a game where you are exploring this sort of procedurally generated space, but there's nothing in it. It's just you, and it's just like a cave that you load up this game, and it makes a little cave for you, and it's different from anyone else's, and you can just explore it if you like, or you can just lay face down and have a lullaby sing to you. So it was really like a tool for myself. Ideally, I'd like to make things like that work on mobile devices, and that game sort of does, but kind of imperfectly. I like the idea of like a game that is like meditative, that you can take out like when you're on the bus and just like play it and have it calm you down or soothe you. And I think we sort of we devalue games that do that, and I think not every game has to tell a really deep story or like scintillate the player. Like I think having games that like provide that kind of function is really important and something I want to think more about.
Great. Yeah, you also work a lot in Twine, or if not in Twine, then in text.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what draws you to that medium specifically when crafting. I mean, how do you choose such as Twine versus a more popular, animated quote unquote gaming style when crafting your work? Can you speak to some about building your work with your Twine? Yeah, excuse me. Can you speak to some of the work you do in your Twine and collaborative workshops?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I use Twine and that I like tell other people to use it and that I teach workshops about it is that it's really easy. I mean, like way more people can write than can code. And it's true that like, yeah, there's like some technical things you can do in Twine to play around with it, and yeah, there are really accessible graphical game creation tools, but like it's still way easier for someone to think about writing a story that can like branch in different directions, or like a poem that does that, than it is to like build assets for a game and think about like physics and think about all of these different things. And so like Twine is like the best tool I can think of for minimizing the time between conceiving an idea and executing it in like a game kind of way. So there is just that, like it's easy, right? And I don't have a programming background, and I have picked some stuff up over the past few years, but it's still like easier for me to just drop into that and write something than it is to do all of the work that is necessary for graphical work. At the same time, like, you know, it's not always the right tool. So I don't think something like Lullaby would have worked in Twine. And because I did want to do it quickly, I just sort of grabbed someone else's assets that were already available. And if I had tried to generate those all by myself, it probably would have taken a lot longer.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Merritt. Just real quick, what's next for Merritt Kopas? Where can people find you on Twitter? Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so my website is mkopas.net, and that's got like a lot of like upcoming tour dates and stuff. So I'm actually doing a tour this fall of the U.S. Northeast. So if you're in like Philadelphia or New York or some other cities, I might be coming by and like doing some weird performance game stuff, which will be a lot of fun. And on Twitter, I'm m_kopas. And other than that, I'm just working on a bunch of projects. The one I'm most excited about right now is called Snake Factory. It's with this really amazing Canadian cartoonist named Michael DeForge. And the premise is that you are working on an assembly line in a factory that makes snakes, which actually never stops sounding ridiculous when I say it out loud. But I'm really excited about it. So yeah.
Oh, I'll have a million questions about Snake Factory. And I could do I might change this segment to 1 million questions about Snake Factory. You really said. Well, thank you, Merritt. I appreciate you coming on. One more turns, 5 questions.
Thanks.